Hi, welcome to the Small Shed. This Saturday I want to look at the rail cars that run on the Stourbridge line. See you in a minute. Now, the little rail cars that run up and down the Stourbridge line are unique in a couple of respects. Firstly, there are only two of them. They're the only things that run on the Network Rail system that are anything like it, and more importantly they're unique in their propulsion system, which is pretty much something that you won't find anywhere else at all. So let's just have a look at the history of these things and a little bit more about them. Now, the history of these things dates back to the mid-1990s, when a firm in the Black Country operated by John Parry started making various sorts of trams on a little chassis that he developed, different widths of track gauge so they could run on narrow gauge or on normal railways. Tried some of these out in all sorts of places. There's one in Brighton. They ran an electric powered version of one along Bristol Harbour for a while, and these were all sorts of different shapes, traditional, old-fashioned and more modern shapes, and they ran these round the works at Cradley Heath and had some success in selling them to areas that wanted something unusual and quirky. The modern version of it, which adopted the same underpinnings, started off with a 12-seater that was a box-like machine and had a slightly different propulsion system. And then the PPM 35, which was the first electric one that they did, or was powered electrically, as I say, ran in Bristol for a while as a demonstration. Body on these things is essentially glass fibre around a metal structure of tubes, and that formed the basis of the first machine that ran on the Stourbridge line. John persuaded Network Rail that this was a viable option to the rail cars that used to operate on the line, and so he undertook a Sunday only service for a long while, for a year or so, to see how this would perform, and it became quite successful. It performed without any major problems with breakdowns or anything. These things are lightweight and therefore much more environmentally friendly. They're much less punishing to the infrastructure underneath the rail track itself, and that trial turned into a full-time operation when they took the old diesel rail car off and the PPM, the Parry People Mover, the first one, took to the rails and operated on the line. These things are meant to be versatile. They've got a step that folded down so that you could get right down to track level if you wanted to, and it ran successfully back and forth between Stourbridge Town and Stourbridge Junction for several years, and that's where I really first caught up with them and decided to start and model it. That contract was so successful that it was decided that they would undertake to pay for two of these machines. They built a little servicing facility down at the one end of the line at Stourbridge Junction, and they ran up and down and have been doing ever since. And here it comes, probably the most unusual vehicle on British Railways or Network Rail lines at the moment. Now, what they've achieved in that time is about 6 million passenger journeys with something like 99.8, 99.9% reliability. Two of these vehicles are run, they just take it in alternative days, and then if there is ever a breakdown, the one can pull the other one out of the way and they can get and run the other service. And it's the propulsion system that's so unique about this, and this is what's fascinated me about it. If you look at the chassis of this thing, there is a 2.3 litre car engine at the back that's running on propane. There's a propane tank over the other side that it's converted to run on. That drives hydraulics which run the wheels, but it also fires up the large round cylindrical part you can see in the middle of the chassis there. Inside that there is a half-ton of metal in a flywheel, and it's that energy store of that flywheel that is what is giving you the power to be able to drive this thing, to accelerate it and to make it run up hills when a 2.3 litre engine would never normally be able to do that. There's a hydraulic drive to each axle, relatively small wheels, which is why the actual ride itself isn't that good on it, and this large metal, I think it's 3 or 4 layers welded together, half-ton balanced flywheel which runs on its flat under the floor on the car itself. And this is the equivalent of running a battery in a hybrid car that runs with a petrol engine and a battery, and to some extent is probably why these things are slightly an anachronism, because nowadays you would not come to that solution. I don't think you would actually go for probably a hybrid with batteries as a solution. On this basis they're running cars that are capable of carrying 60 people down the line and back up again. It's downhill all the way down to the bottom, so that in itself isn't a massive issue other than the acceleration away from the actual station. But obviously when you're down at the bottom there is quite a big climb then to get back out. When the thing is going down, the hydraulics are used with regenerative braking that actually then spins the flywheel back up to speed as well. That provides a braking force but also regenerates power. As you can see, the climb out of the station is quite steep, and that's why the thing is so remarkable in that it's only using a 2.3 litre diesel or petrol engine converted to run on LPG. Services run every 10 minutes, so we'll just hop inside and climb back up all the way, and you can see roughly how long the journey takes. So on the way back up they just get the flywheel cranked up to about 2,500 revs a minute and kick it in. As I say, the ride is not the smoothest, and it does show its basic engineering pretty much on this sort of line where the joints aren't particularly good on the rails anyway, so you get quite a lot of rattling around in it. And that is probably the biggest problem with the whole setup, the lack of investment that's been available. This sort of thing, really, to be successful, would have needed many millions to develop properly. And there is an argument put, which I subscribe to, that it's a solution looking for a problem. This is probably one of the few places in the country where it's actually suited to what it does, and that is less than a mile run up a hill. On the flat, these things will run perfectly well. They've tried them out on the Severn Valley and some of the other small railways, and it does provide a low-cost alternative to sort of local rail. But there's just not the appetite for it, or the willingness of anybody else in the industry to take much notice, and therefore it's pretty much doomed to remaining as it is, perhaps the only two cars that have been or ever will be produced like this. I suspect anybody in the future would just go for an electric tram setup and spend an awful lot more, but it would just use an off-the-shelf set of tram cars that are like the ones that they run in Birmingham, Nottingham, Manchester, places like that, where they've had much more. These are firms with billions spent on research and development that will produce products that are far more sophisticated. And as I say, the solution itself may well be the wrong one nowadays, in that battery technology and motor technology has just advanced so much that the idea of driving a big lump of metal with a car engine is probably doomed from the start. So there we leave it. That's the Class 139 Parry People Mover locomotives, or rail cars, 139001 and 139002, the like of which you will probably never see again anywhere. Well, I hope that was of interest. It sort of explains my interest in the line. It's not just the fact that it's a railway line, it's the uniqueness of it and the quirkiness of it to some extent. Next time I'll have a look at my models of the rail cars and how that's been something that's also been developing over the last 14 or 15 years. Hope you enjoyed the video. Next week we'll be doing something different, I hope, and I look forward to seeing you then. Bye.